Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys a little bit about why these days I kind of prefer fives for general buildup, and I think for most people just general size and strength training. 5 rep sets are kind of a sweet spot. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Now, guys, and I want people to understand this. So this is just kind of not saying that this is the only way to do things. I'm not saying that it's even guaranteed to be the best way to do things, but why I just generally push in that direction. And I'm not saying you can't have great success doing mostly doubles or even 8 rep sets or 10 rep sets. I'm not saying that at all. This is just the reason I prefer this, and I think this is the reason there are a lot of coaches out there who prefer this. This is why 3x5s, 5x5s, things like that tend to be very popular in general training programs by experienced coaches, very experienced coaches out there. And I'm going to link actually down in the comments below, I'm going to link actually a Dr. Brad Schoenfeld study who mostly cares about muscle growth. And what's interesting in that study, it's one that he did on relatively advanced lifters, people who had several years of training experience, where they did equal number of sets, not equal volume, but equal sets, with one group of them doing something like the 3 to 4 rep range, right? And the other group doing, I believe it was 10 to 12, right? Doing 10 to 12. So this wasn't equal volume like the one where he did before, where it was 7 sets of 3 compared to 3 sets of 10. This was like 3 sets of each exercise was done with these rep ranges. And they found some interesting stuff in there. What they noted was that the group that went the heaviest, which makes sense, with the most weight on the bar, they got slightly better strength outcomes. Now, a lot of that's neurological in nature, but generally we know that when you train with heavier loads, you do get stronger faster, but light loads still improve your 1 rep max also, right? Size and strength cannot be completely separated. Well, what they also found was that the lighter group, I call it really lightweight. They called it moderate. To me, that's really light. I mean, if you can do 10 or 12 reps with a weight, it is light as hell. But they found that they gained slightly more muscle, particularly in the lower body, and slightly less strength. What they also noted, though, is that the heavier group felt a little more beat up. And when you start looking at stuff like this, and they noted that the muscular endurance was the same. In other words, the people who trained with triples gained just as much strength on their like 10, 15 rep maxes as the people who did higher reps did, right? So you don't gain more muscular endurance by doing higher reps. Well, when we start looking at the hypertrophy end, it would make sense if there's equal number of sets and you're going under 5 reps, while the higher reps would produce more muscle growth. And this is kind of why I recommend people work with 5s and can get very, very close to your 5 rep max, even for multiple 5 rep sets. You might have to take longer breaks to pull that off. But if you look at other data that's out there and stuff I've linked in the past, there's a reasonable amount of evidence to suggest that hypertrophy is really only starting to be stimulated in the last 5 reps of a set. In other words, as you're getting close to your maxes, what you could do for a continual set. Now, if you can rest, pause 3 or 4 seconds and grind out another rep, that's not your max. In other words, if you can do 8 reps and then you can rest 3 or 4 seconds and grind out a 9th rep, that's still your 8 rep max usually, because you couldn't do it back to back to back. You couldn't just do reps, pause for a second and just continue 8 reps. So you're actually exceeding your the number of reps you would be able to do with things like the rest pause. So people need to keep that in mind when we're talking about this. But usually within that last bit. So in other words, if you're training with your 8 rep max, you're not really stimulating any significant hypertrophy or structural changes in the first 3 reps. But by rep 4 you are. So rep 4 through 8, and assuming you even stop, let's say you're training with your 8 rep max and you do 7s, right? So you're getting about 4 reps in each set that has the potential for growth stimulation. And I would suggest to people that's what we mean by your training volume. Your training volume is the quality reps. How many total reps you did that stimulated muscle growth. And we know that you have to get relatively close, and it's about 5 reps within failure to really see that. So if you're working with something under 5 reps, you might be maximizing tension on the muscle, but in terms of actual getting more structural adaptations, which is what we think of as muscle growth. You're changing the structure of the muscle, you're remodeling the muscle, it has to have these structural changes. To get training adaptation that causes structural changes, we need reps that are within 5 reps of failure. Well, if you're doing triples with your 4 rep max, you're only getting 3 reps. Or so you go to your 5 rep max and you're doing triples. What happens if you go to your 6 rep max? Well, you're not even getting 3 reps in, you're getting 2 reps. And a lot of people do that. We'll train with triples with our 6 rep max. And that's great for speed and power and everything else, but we're potentially shortchanging ourselves there. So what you're seeing with these things, let's say these people are training at 8 to 12 and they're going close to failure and they do 3 sets, well, they got 15 quality reps. Whereas if you're doing threes, let's say you do 3 sets of 3, even if it's your 5 rep max or heavier, you're only getting 9 quality reps. So you had 9 reps to stimulate growth. So wouldn't we expect the higher rep group to see more muscle growth? Yeah. So what we find when we start going low like that, we need a lot more sets. We need more total sets in the gym to stimulate the same muscle growth when we drop under 5 reps. But if you are kind of in that zone to where you're not quite at your 6 rep max, but a few pounds more than your 5 rep max, and you do 3 sets of 5, what happens? Well, we have now gotten it probably as many as 14 to 15 quality reps with 3 sets. Well, what does that mean? That our training volume is equal to 3 sets of 10 in terms of overall potential stimulation. However, we have probably used a heavier load. Therefore, we're going to get more potential for strength gains out of it. And I think that's the reason that I think 5s really are kind of a sweet spot, to be right around the 5 rep range, because we're kind of finding that middle ground between how much training volume can we get in versus load on the bar. And I think that's a real big deal when we are trying to stimulate both. And a lot of guys say, well, I don't care about strength. Well, you should. Because again, study after study after study confirms that for drug-free lifters, a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle. And if you gained more strength, you do have more potential for load increase. And therefore, you have more potential for progressive overload, even with your volume work. So you should care about that. If you're trying to gain as much muscle as you can without drugs, getting as strong as possible does matter. And so the 5 rep sets really strike a good balance there. They strike a good balance there. And that's also the other problem we find, is that if it's a good balance with recovery, because that is the one thing that's noted. When we start getting heavier than that, it does beat people up more. It's like we saw, remember the study he also did where we looked at lifters who were doing the 3 sets of 7 with a heavier weight versus the 3 sets of 10 where the volume was equaled, right? They moved about the same tonnage because you ended up doing 21 total reps with a heavier weight versus 30 with a lighter. They ended up moving about the same amount of weight each workout. Their muscle growth was indistinguishable. So that shows in that one, when we look at those studies compared to this one, because the total training volume was equal, they saw the same amount of muscle growth. The heavier group did see better strength gains, but they were also way more fatigued and way more beat up, and that's because of doing 7 sets of 3 with a really heavy weight is more fatiguing to the structures of your body, your nervous system, everything else, than doing the lighter weight for similar amounts of total volume. It's harder on your body. But that's not quite as true when we go over to 5s, and particularly when we're only doing the 3 sets, and that's a big part of it too. You have to look at the fact of how many limit sets are you doing, and you just simply need more sets when you go under that. When you go under 5 reps, you simply have to have more total sets in order to stimulate the same amount of muscle growth. So you spend more time in the gym, a little harder on your recovery. You get the benefit of the gaining the strength better. So that's why working right around 5s, 6s, maybe as high as 7s, I think that's a much, much better sweet spot. It's a much better sweet spot because it allows you to get enough training volume with fewer sets to maximize muscle growth. But again, going heavier so that you can also gain strength very effectively with it, in proportion, but again, it's not quite so heavy that it just beats you up the way that really, really heavy work does. And so that's why I've pushed in that direction. For a long time, I pushed threes, higher volume with threes, and because it works very, very well. But again, those who do it, they understand the time limitations involved. There's a time constraint. There's a recovery constraint. All those things you have to factor in. And I think for general buildup, for general training, I think fives works a little bit better in that regard. And it's not to say the other doesn't work. It's just a little tougher. It's a little harder to recover from. You spend more time lifting. But the recovery can be a big deal. The recovery can be a big deal, whereas you don't run into those same problems with 5-rep sets. So I think it kind of gives you a good balance between the best of both worlds. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.